Hello and welcome to Aviadev Insight Africa, the podcast offering a window to the world of African aviation with your host, John Howell, CEO and founder of Aviadev Africa. Today, I am delighted to be joined by somebody from an airline that has grown within one of the most dynamic markets globally and now offers around 60% of all seats in the South African domestic market. If you haven't guessed already, the airline in question is FlySafair, and the individual I'm welcoming back to the podcast for I don't know how many appearances, but it must be 3, 4, 5, something like that, is Kirby Gordon, the Chief Marketing Officer at FlySafair. So welcome back, Kirby.
Thanks, John. Great to be chatting again.
Absolutely. So we're getting in touch now. We're only a couple of weeks after Aviadev in Zanzibar. And one of the topics that we touched on through one of the panels was the implementation and application of AI in the aviation space. It's something that I've been dabbling with in the content space. I think we've all dabbled with it on a personal basis about how do we implement it and how do we make it work. But what FlySafair have recently done is launched something called Lindi. Lindi is an AI agent who operates as a virtual travel agent, somebody that you can get some feedback from and get some advice from and obviously make changes as well. So let's start there. What sparked the idea? What is the big picture here?
Yeah, absolutely, John. As we discussed at the conference, AI is changing so much about the world around us and certainly the way that we do business. And I think the application or the use cases across the board are just so incredibly vast. And one of them, which is just niche, but I guess every little bit gives us an instance of where it's all happening, is in the sort of customer service space. And so what we did is as we were working and experimenting more with AI, it became quite a natural example for us to use to try and optimize the way in which we can actually deal with our customers and manage the volumes of what they need to deal with. What it really offers us the opportunity to do is a big part of the low cost model is, of course, that whole notion of self-service. And we love self-service because it serves us in two ways. Firstly, it gives the customer a great experience because they can get an immediate response to whatever their issue is without waiting. Obviously, you can operate at scale. But equally, if we can effectively put a machine in the place, and I sound like the fourth industrial revolution happening here, but if we can put a machine in the place of a task that a person, and particularly a rote kind of task that would just as the same thing over and over again, it's also ostensibly meant to be cheaper for us to be able to do that. And so that was a part of the sort of business model that sparked this idea to say, let's try and create this thing. Let's see how far we can go and let's see what we can get out of it. We really aimed for something that was a little bit more useful than just a kind of repository of information. I think there's so many of those, but we wanted something that could actually really have effect on bookings and have effect on people's reservations and help them out with a lot of what they're dealing with.
Yeah, so it's in the old days, we'd call them a chatbot, the thing that pops up on a website that has a set response and can answer certain questions. This is AI agent, so it can do a bit more. It can not think for itself. I'm getting into that world as well there, saying it's like sentient, but it is able to interpret what people are asking for a lot better. In terms of, as a low-cost operator with huge volumes of travelers, how do you incentivize people to actually use this? What's in it for them? Why would they choose to use this as a system?
So I think in the first instance, right now, where we're at in terms of the evolution is we are quite cautious. And I think it is one of the bigger kind of questions that we can speak to around AI and its implementation is we're still keeping the guardrails on it really closely. And so we've limited some of her capabilities and equally, obviously, are watching very closely in terms of what she does, which is another whole interesting conversation about how your human power kind of moves away from helping customers to auditing your tool. But that aside, so right now we're keeping her in quite a soft launch phase. So she's available to your sort of first adopters, if you will, your early adopters. And that seems to be going quite well. But in the long run, the idea would be that we incentivize use of her through effectively two methodologies or two things. Firstly, to really put front and center that fact that she's effective at achieving what you want to achieve and immediately available, which I think is the great thing. No one really likes to deal with a call center, for example. No one likes to wait. You want an immediate response. You want to know that there's somebody on the other end of the line that can deal with whatever it is you want done.
And at all times, right? 24/7.
Yeah. And in all languages and in all locales, which is amazing. So she's got that capability, which is cool. So I think that in and of itself is its own incentive. And then again, true to sort of low cost model, what we tend to do, and I mean, we're speaking to other airlines and people involved in the industry here, is we obviously disincentivize or at least subsidize our more expensive channels by charging a fee. So if you come into our call center and you enact a change, which is actually available for free on our website through our self-service tools, then we charge you a handling fee, is effectively a charge that's associated with that. Whereas obviously, if this channel is one that we can either reduce the costs on quite substantially, we can reduce the fee, or eradicate the costs largely, we need not charge a fee. So it would become a means to do that. And I think that also incentivizes the movement away into this environment. And I think the key element to that, though, is making sure, and therein lies the glory of AI as well, and natural language models, is making sure that the interaction is human, and so that my mum could do it. She's nervous of the website because she doesn't want to click the wrong thing, but she'll happily have a conversation with someone, and it doesn't really matter if it's a person or a machine if they're on the other end of a chat. So we need to get it to that level that she might not really even know the difference.
Yeah, it's very much, it's a carrot and stick approach, incentivize and disincentivize. And little things like you keep talking about her and you talk about Lindi, and hey, you should ask Lindi if you've got a question, if you want to make a change. I think that really helps. But the thing that's transformational for me as a user of AI is the ways you can interact with it, the way you talk to ChatGPT. You can do a voice note, you can write to it in your natural way to ask it to do things. Even to edit this podcast. Now, in the old days, I would have to manually look at a waveform and cut things out. I can literally write in what I want to do. I can say overlay audio from X to Y, and the AI will interpret that. It will pull the data. It will actually put that on. And that's an incredible way to make it accessible. This is the thing that always scares people who are technophobes, is I'm not going to know how to do it. But that's where the user experience is everything, where all you have to do is have a WhatsApp conversation and say, I would like to change my booking from tomorrow to 3 days' time. And then Lindi will come back and say, what's your PNR? And away you go. And it hasn't required any human resource, which quite rightly you should charge for, because that's an overhead for the airline. And the less overhead you have, the more savings you can pass to the passenger. So let's talk a little bit about specifically what can she do. Right? Talk us through the things she can do in beta right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So as one would expect, she can answer any questions that you have about anything generic. So if you need to query her on some of the terms and conditions associated with your ticket type or with your fare, or dangerous goods rules around whatever you can take on board, or services available, or visa requirements for some of our destinations, etc. She's got all of that information. So she's got that repository that she can work from. So she's got a full FAQ capability, which is one of the key things. She can also make reservations. At this point, we've got the limitation on it that she can only do it for one passenger rather than for group bookings or with more passengers. There's a certain complexity inherent to that. So you can literally, through voice note with her, say, yeah, Lindi, I want to fly to Durban tonight. She has a sense of where you're at. She'll give you the prices for the flights this afternoon post 12 o'clock and help you execute a reservation. She can do changes to existing reservations. So she can help you. You give her your information, your number, your security kind of clearance, either your ID or the PNR or whatever information she needs out of the reservation, and she can help you do changes there. And then she can help you with seat selection and also adding on additional services. So you can get hold of her and say, hey, Lindi, I need a suitcase on my flight tonight, a check bag. And she can pull that in for you as well, which is pretty cool. So yeah, she's got that capability of actually accessing and reading a booking, being able to give you specific feedback on your booking, and then do, within limited remit, execute changes, execute additions, execute seat allocations, that sort of thing.
And just because I know you're a big marketing person, I'm really interested to know how you came up with Lindi. You decided not to be Kirby. You decided not to go for some sort of avatar random name. Lindi is it's very cool, but how did you come to that?
So it's actually interesting that you asked, because it was a big question and we did quite a lot of research and work into it. And it's all psychology, John. So Lindi, we wanted her to have a personality and a caricature. And the whole idea is what we motivated us on every level was we need people to be able to relate to her and to trust her as a kind of individual. So we didn't want her to be a chatbot. We've gone with this notion of an AI agent. She needed a name. She needs a bit of a personality. We looked at some psychology and we tried to figure out what to do. South Africans generally have a higher trust score to women than they do to men. So it was obvious that we needed to make her female. So she became female. And then the name Lindi is actually one that we specifically chose, and specific spelling behind it, Lindi as well, because the particular study we read said in South African psyche, people tend to actually, when they're they picture somebody in an abstract, they picture a close resemblance of themselves. And so if you give a name that's like really specific toward a specific culture or a language or something, then they'll start picturing someone different, and that kind of eradicates a layer of sort of connection. And so Lindi is quite a universal name, because in South Africa, Lindi could be an Afrikaans Lindi could be a Lindsay in English, it could be a Lindiswa in Xhosa. So, you picture it's one of those really accessible names, and particularly because it's contracted, that allows users to actually, when they put an image in their minds of somebody a lot like them. And so that's why we chose Lindi, because it's quite a universal South African name.
Oh, that's very cool, and explains the whole Alexa thing. Siri, I think, is supposed to be female, but it's not a regular human name, but that was very early anyway. But no, I find that stuff absolutely fascinating, and thanks for sharing that with us. And what about the feedback? Because I haven't had a chance to use this myself, but you said with anything like this, you'll always get the early adopters. They become your beta testers, right? They're the ones who say, I want to give this a go. I want to test the limitations. I'm sure you tested it before, but now that it's live, like, what has the feedback been? And feeding into that, what's the commercial impact that you see as a result of bringing this in and obviously expanding its kind of reach and its capability?
The feedback so far has been great, John. And I think, but what we also bear in mind is that we are addressing those early adopters. They are the kinds of people that, knowing what it is, are inclined to think it's really cool and be really enthusiastic about it. We're not naive to the sort of huge positivity around it. I think for us, the real test will be when we push it out into the kind of everyman space and start seeing what the response is there. So it's been really strong from that perspective, and there's a lot of encouragement from behind it. Also, obviously, in a beta phase, you rely a lot on user feedback. So you look for those volumes of feedbacks to try and find all the little bits of niggles along the way. And that's been phenomenal too. We've had some great sort of closures on those loops and helps us iron things out. When you come into development with AI, in a true sense, and I mean, I've been reading quite a bit about this as well, it's not like standard T development. It's not that you sit and you try to run it in sprints and you release bits of code and you do things as you go along the way. But it has that slight human element to it, where because it works off of natural language models, you're almost more wrangling the AI than you are coding it. And so that's quite a fascinating change in terms of the way that you work. And we're trying to deploy that sort of view in terms of the way that we push her out into the market as well. So yeah, so far really great. From a commercial perspective, she's quite expensive at the moment for us, actually. And part of that is because we're throwing everything in the kitchen sink at her to make sure that she's as strong as possible. So she's working off of like the top models out there. And ultimately what one would do is A, through volume, but B, through better understanding what models to apply and what temperatures to apply at which phases, you can then start accessing some of the cheaper ones. So there is a refinement in the way she works that will ultimately come into the fore. So there's a learning on that side as well. She still makes sense, but she needs to be a little bit cheaper.
Yeah, but it's an R&D element, and it's something that's got a long tail, it's got longevity. I think the point that I would make here is that as AI becomes more of everybody's everyday, when you're encountering it in other circumstances, that's doing a lot of the work for you. You're not trying to implement a technology that is only going to be used when you're flying on Safair, right? You're going to have this when you're ordering a coffee. You're going to have this when you're on the train or whatever. You're engaging with AI more and more every single day. A lot of people don't even know. And it's about the behavior is being changed, and you're part of that wave rather than the only one on that wave, right? I think that's an important point for people to understand, and for other airlines to say, actually, yeah, this isn't us on our own. We're doing this as part of a wider movement. And now that the AI genie is out the bottle, it's not going back in. It becomes, I have it as a bookmark on I have ChatGPT here and use it, not for everything. This is actually me. This is actually Kirby. But it does make, if it's utilized, it's a tool in the tool belt. And I look at it, you have to walk a kilometer, and then Kirby gets offered a bike to do that same kilometer. Why would he not jump on the bike? It doesn't matter whether he's more or less fit than me, he's going to get there first because he's got a tool to get him there quicker. So I think that's a really important point to be made in terms of just the AI revolution and the fact that you can sit there like a Luddite, as we call it in the UK, and pretend it's not coming, but it's already here, and I see it every day. So just moving on from that, in terms of AI into the organization as a whole, we've talked about Lindi, but how are you looking at this? Because you've always been innovative. with like onboard payments and doing a lot of these things as firsts in South Africa. Are you embracing it now into operations, into marketing? Like, where are you applying AI and where do you see the opportunity?
Yeah, look, the opportunities, like I said in the beginning, John, this is one use case for where it comes into your bigger kind of scheme of things. But the reality is I always try to, when I think about these technologies, I always try to reduce them to what they are in their most sort of basic senses. And when you understand, to your point earlier, what the tools are, you start to see the use cases quite quickly. And AI has a number of phenomenal use cases. I think in its basic kind of characteristics, it's got this natural language capability. So there's this very human way of interacting with it. It's also got this phenomenal capability to manage and consume and process vast amounts of data, which is really interesting too. We're using it a lot in terms of running hypotheses on some of our reporting. We are using it in our marketing environment, obviously, to optimize what's happening there. And then, of course, create the kind of hypotheses and generative, creative, or outputs on whatever it is that we need to test in an e-marketing capability. But the use cases, as far as we're concerned, and implementation of these things is taking time, are absolutely limitless. So if you think, for example, flight data monitoring, right? If you're looking at preventative maintenance, we work very closely, and a lot of the OEMs are obviously looking into this. How we talk about listening to the aircraft. So you're starting to see a trend in something along the flight path of a particular aircraft. What is that indicating to you in the long run? And now with that, but the data set for that is so vast. And now with all of that coming in with an AI kind of layer over it, what we perceive and what we see as an opportunity is that ultimately you're going to be able to run a hypothesis and say, gosh, I'm noticing, is it true that an increase in vibration on an engine precipitates, I'm just going to make something up, the replacement of a pitot tube or whatever it is on that side? And you'd actually be able to interrogate the full data set and come out with it saying, yeah, no, it's actually not about the pitot tube, it's about the angle of attack sensor or whatever the case is, God forbid. But we understand these things in a more nuanced fashion than we maybe would have before, because we're not sampling, we're literally working with everything. And that's that kind of big data capability that helps us from a sales perspective, it helps us from a safety perspective, it helps us in just so many different ways to understand what's going on, and then in the true kind of low cost fashion, drive efficiencies. Where are we finding all of those efficiencies? OTP, costs, whatever it is.
That's exactly it. I think that at the end of the day, your assets need to be in the air to be working. So doing the preventative maintenance, it's something that we talked about for years. The guys at Rolls-Royce, for example, we talked about this years ago, and they do this already with the engines in terms of they know before there's a problem and they can book in maintenance slots so that your aircraft have the minimum amount of downtime. They all need maintaining, but it's a case of when you come into use an F1 analogy, when you come into the pits, they already know what the issue is. So they're ready with the bit that needs changing. And then you're out again straight away, rather than come in and then we'll look at the diagnosis, then we'll order the part, then we'll hire the person. And before you know it, you've lost flying time. And with a fleet like yours and the way that you operate, you need the aircraft operational for the maximum amount of time. So it is all about that. Just one point on the generative AI side of things. And then this is a bit geeky from a marketing perspective, because I know you love it and I do too. Like, how much of this are you doing? And do you find that it's performing better or not as well as the stuff that you used to have to either create in-house or physical images that you would use? The jury's out for me. Sometimes I feel like the AI really captures people's imagination, and sometimes I think it's suppressed by some of the platforms because they understand it's AI. I'm not sure, but what are your thoughts?
Yes, we use it cautiously and in combination. I think the big phenomenal thing, which is of course very tempting from it, is particularly on a costs front. So as you say, you've got to be cautious about where you use and what the application is, and that it's realistic and that it's not misleading, and that it serves your purpose. But if it's quite sort of vanilla in its presentation, then that's great. But the phenomenal thing about AI, particularly when you're using bits of content, is that you get the rights off of everything. So if you're creating a song on an AI platform like Suno, for example, you've got full commercial rights against using that inventory. Similarly with video stuff. So I have a friend that's a CMO of another organization. They're a financial services organization, and she had an advert, a TV ad that she needed to make. And they had the concept, they storyboarded it out, it was phenomenal, and they quoted it out to actually do the production on it. And the price tag came back at 8 million rand. And they sat down with a production house in Cape Town and they created the whole thing out of generative AI using video and just using a human voiceover over it. And it took them a bit of time, a bit of prompting back and forth. forth. But in the end, she managed to produce a really excellent TV commercial for 400,000 Rand with full rights against everything. So it's wild, but there's a lot of temptation around what it means.
Yeah, and I think, again, that's another example of people might go, oh, no, this is terrible. It's a whole other conversation about the AI revolution, what it's going to do. But my thing is, don't panic about this. We've had these historical shifts. There were people 200 years ago toiling away in the farm, and then a bloke drove in the tractor and suddenly could do the whole field in no time using a machine. And they all said, what are we going to do? And all those people moved to do something else. They moved to the cities. They work in totally new industries. I think we're going through a shift, whether we like it or not. We don't know what those jobs will be. I know there are people who are worried about these things, but there's still an element, even with that experience that you just said, there's still people who had to be involved in that process. They had to prompt it. They had to go back and forth. They needed patience with this system. There is still, for me, it's about using it as a tool. Don't just push out whatever it gives you. You still need to be able to interpret it and use it for your thing. But it's a great place to get started and just another tool in the toolkit. So thank you for indulging me on that incredibly geeky conversation about marketing. Sorry to our listeners who want to know all about X, Y, and Z. So I do want to come to that before I let you go anyway, which is, obviously you and Elmar were with us in Aviadev in Zanzibar. So it'd be great to get some reflections, obviously, on the event, but also a bit of an update on what is happening for you in the regional perspective as well. You've been in that region. We've covered that on the podcast when you first launched as well, going into new markets. And so, yeah, it'd be great to just get a bit of an overview on that. And then we can have a quick chat about the fleet as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Aviadev is always a phenomenal opportunity that we really enjoy and grab with both hands to be able to just interface with so many relevant parties within the regions, but obviously also our colleagues at other airlines and the OEMs and the lessors, and everyone's there. So it's a great forum to actually have those kinds of conversations. And I think very meaningful for us to touch base with the various different kinds of tools and capabilities and opportunities that may exist within the region. So at this stage, we do fly to Zanzibar, that we very proudly flew a lot of the delegates there, which was wonderful. It's a great route for us to continue to see there. And I think above and beyond anything else, obviously for us, just a wonderful excuse and opportunity to hit the island and see what's going on. And it's phenomenal to see what's happening. The amount of investment that's happening in that space is insane, which is really wonderful. But yeah, I think very useful for us to continue a lot of the conversations, touch base with a lot of the airports and the aviation authorities, places where we do fly, places where we don't fly, to expand upon those opportunities and to see what sort of might sit in the future for us as we move forward. So at this stage, from a regional kind of planning perspective, we're taking a consolidation phase, so we're in quite a moderate growth phase. So we're not looking at anything particularly heavy in terms of where we go further with our new routes. But we are conducting fresh studies on certain destinations to see what the opportunities might be there, revisiting some of the numbers to see where they might sit relative to the sort of bouquet of routes that we're operating now domestically. The vast majority of our business obviously is within the domestic space, but it's phenomenal to take a look at which routes are ripe for a model like ours to be appropriate on that space, and where we can come in and find out if operating something with an efficiency, with a low cost offering, with a lower kind of cost per seat can really stimulate a market, and to determine whether or not that market is there, which is often the kind of mindset that we approach those conversations with.
Yeah, and that's all that we ask as well, is we say, look, once a year, come along and listen to these guys. They're going to work on a business case. They want you. And that's the thing that's changing, as opposed to the airline making, of course, you make the decision, but these guys are coming to influence that and to say, I have an offer you can't refuse. Like, there's no horse's heads in your bed or anything like that, but it's definitely, they're coming at you with compelling offers, and then they can go back and tweak those and say, hey, look, we need to up the marketing support, whatever it may be. And at the end of the day, I know how you guys operate, and most airlines is you're always evaluating. You might not be in a growth phase right now, but you'll always look, and if the opportunity's there and there is some aircraft availability and some extra capacity somewhere, why not give it a go? I think the last question I just wanted to ask is about the fleet, because I think when we last spoke, you were trying to phase out the 737-400s, bring in the 800s. Like, where are we at? How many have you got? What's the situation right now? And is there some more growth there?
Yeah, so we're up to 36 aircraft at the moment. It'll be 37 by the end of the year. And what we are doing is, you're dead right, we are phasing out the classics. So I think the last of them is due to leave probably about midway/Q3 next year, and then ultimately be replaced by the 800s, which is nice because that in and of itself obviously begets a certain degree of growth. 164 seats on the 400s, and then you got 189 on the NGs, which is fantastic. And that actually also feeds quite nicely into the regional market, because we established a lot of our regional market with our 400s, although I think most of it now is being operated by 800s. So that's a really kind of key evolution for us, and is a really nice phase as a low-cost carrier for us to enter into. And it's obviously not permanent, but the kind of golden mantra, obviously, amongst low-cost carriers is to just operate one type. And whilst we broken the rule a little bit with the classics and the 800s. We now have a moment where we can be only 800s. And I think it stands to reason. I don't think there's any surprises to say that that's also obviously a move in anticipation of the eventual move towards a MAX. That's inevitable. And we needed to make sure that we had made sure that the 400s were out, because we don't want to operate three types. Rather get ourselves into a position where we're now ready to upskill and ensure that we can bring in that new type when it becomes viable and available and meaningful for us to do. So that is the kind of evolution that we're looking at. And yeah, it's a wild world out there in terms of getting access to aircraft right now. I think we all speak about it quite actively. We obviously all know the realities behind the metal market and what's coming out of it. So it's tough. It's tough to find good deals and meaningful deals. And obviously for us as an airline, it's growth is one thing, which is phenomenal, but there's also just your constant fleet maintenance and refreshing. So we've got to keep that in mind too as we keep going. So our assets team is growing and they're working really hard, but they're a really fundamental part of our business and making sure that we're viable.
Yeah, no, fascinating. Yeah, it's very interesting to hear about the MAX, because of course that then does open new markets, because it has different economies and different capabilities. And I think the skeptics would always have said, when we first talked, they'd say, oh, Safair can't make these regional markets work. There just isn't. They've got too big a gauge for those markets. You've established in quite a few of these now. I think Joburg-Harare is a really big one for you, isn't it? And you've not found that, because of course you've come in. Yes, there's a lot of capacity, but also you're able to keep the cost low and stimulate a new market. I'm the biggest advocate for, when you go into a market or when an airline expands, it doesn't have to cannibalize. It absolutely can just stimulate something completely new and make flying viable for people who had never considered it before. So have you found that when you've gone into these regional markets, like you say, you went in with the 400s, but quickly you were able to put the 800s, that's a great sign that they perform.
Yeah, no, I mean, we have, John, and it is something that you've got to approach selectively. Africa, from a regional perspective, it's not old Walt Disney's sort of mantra of you build it and they will come is not necessarily always true. There's not necessarily always a strong market on a particular route that will be there, but there are opportunities. And I think, look, realistically, if you're looking at kind of route development, that there is a natural evolution that would happen between the connection on two cities. It might be established initially through a kind of charter demand, and then in turn be able to support a smaller gauge aircraft for a period, and an airline that runs a mixed bag of smaller gauges might be able to upscale that. And then eventually it'll come to a point where you need to start putting on a narrow body, and where it becomes viable for a low-cost carrier to jump in there and say, let us offer a cheaper market. And again, if that then grows and expands and becomes more meaningful, and you now start really serving different classes of service because the market's just big enough to do that, more capacity, more frequency, it grows and grows and grows. But there is quite a sort of an obvious track to it. We're not necessarily, with our gauge, in the business of establishing new routes unless there's a pretty certain case out there that this is going to be something that's viable, because the cost of running that experiment is just so massive to us. So as a low-cost carrier, we play a certain role in the ecosystem and in the evolution, and that's how we have to look at it. My grandmother will come to me and say, it's why don't you fly from Port Elizabeth to Bloemfontein? And I'm like, because it's not for us. Someone else needs to, but someone that's got the right metal to do it.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point. It's just very pragmatic, isn't it? That with the aircraft you've got, you can't be the Trojan horse into these markets. You have to let that be developed by an airline with a smaller gauge aircraft and that sort of fleet. But if you look at the Cape Town Joburg, you've got a variety of aircraft flying that route. Okay, a lot of narrow bodies, but you do have smaller gauged aircraft as well. And they find a niche of what time are they going, and actually people prefer that experience, or they whatever it may be, or they've got an interline agreement. There's reasons people pick a particular airline. It could be their health insurance, right? Or it could be that you get points at one of the supermarkets. I don't know, or company policy. But I think giving people those options is great. And obviously, you guys made a big step going into the regional market, and you've been able to consolidate on lots of those routes. So I'm just really happy that they're still going. And obviously, there is room for everybody here. And I'm sure there'll be more expansion in the future. But thank you for giving us so much time today, Kirby. It's always a pleasure chatting to you. And I hope you're keeping warm down there. It's lovely and sunny, 26 degrees here in the UK today, but I think it's pretty cold down there in SA, isn't it?
Yeah, I think we're hitting about 15, which is cold for us.
my hammock and pina colada is calling, so I better wrap this one up today.
I'll be fighting both days.
Yeah, sounds good. So yeah, hopefully I'll see you in the second half of the year, and yeah, all the best with Lindi and the rollout. And I think anybody who's down there listening based in SA, go and have a go. Next time you book a Safair flight, go and check out Lindi and see what she can do. And I'm sure that will only go from strength to strength. And yeah, we'll speak to you soon. Thanks for joining us, Kirby. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks, John.
All right. Thanks, everybody out there, for listening. If you did enjoy it, do hit share on your platform of choice and share it with somebody in your network you think would benefit from having a listen. Obviously, subscribe to the podcast. It's completely free and you'll never miss another episode. Also, go to the Aviadev YouTube channel. All of the sessions from Aviadev are there. All the podcasts are there. Completely free of charge, open source. And we'll see you for the next episode soon. Take care. Bye-bye.